Zariah had always known she was different. Among the Valari, beauty was strength, symmetry, and perfection. Their scales were meant to be smooth and shining like polished stone. Their mandibles had to be sharp, curving outward in perfect balance. Their eyes were deep violet, glowing faintly in the dark. That was what her people considered beautiful. That was what her people admired. Zariah was none of these things. Her scales were uneven. One side of her face carried a jagged patch, where the scales looked cracked and dull. Her left mandible curved inward, like it had grown the wrong way, and the elders often said it made her look unfinished. Her eyes were not the deep violet of her kin. They were pale gray, cloudy, like the ash of a dying fire. From the moment she was born, whispers followed her. She will bring shame. She is broken. Cover her face. When she was very young, she did not understand why her mother avoided looking at her, why her father always sighed when others came near. She only knew that whenever guests arrived, she was told to stay in her room, to hide, to stay out of sight. As she grew older, she realized the truth. The Valari judged her unworthy. She was a flaw in their proud image, an embarrassment to her clan. Children mocked her in the streets, pointing at her bent mandible, laughing at the way her gray eyes seemed dull and lifeless. Some even hissed insults, calling her cracked face or ash eyes. Zariah learned to survive by silence. She pulled a dark cloak over her head wherever she went. She kept her gaze lowered. She moved quietly, like a shadow, so no one would notice her. If she did not speak, if she did not meet their eyes, maybe they would forget she existed. But she never forgot. Every cruel whisper stayed inside her, heavy as stone. She told herself she did not care, that she had grown numb. But at night, when she sat alone in her small room, she sometimes touched her face with trembling claws and wondered, why did I have to be born like this? Why am I so ugly even to my own people? The pain was sharpest when she looked at the stars. The Valari often told stories about their ancestors who rose to greatness, who were admired and praised. Zariah could not imagine anyone ever speaking her name with honor. She felt as though her life was destined to be small, hidden, unseen. She longed, desperately, secretly, for someone to look at her without disgust, for someone to speak to her without pity, for someone to see her instead of her flaws. But that wish felt like a cruel dream. No one had ever given her even a kind glance. No one had ever said a kind word. To the Valari, she was something to be endured, not cherished. So Zariah grew quiet and careful. She took work as a lowly aide in the translation halls, where she could remain in the background. The halls were filled with voices from many worlds, Valari traders, diplomats, and now, strangest of all, humans. The humans had arrived only recently. They were strange, soft creatures, with bare skin instead of scales. They had no mandibles, no armor, no glow in their eyes. Yet they walked with boldness, laughed loudly, and smiled often. Zariah could not understand them. They seemed so fragile, yet they carried themselves as if they belonged everywhere. She avoided them like she avoided everyone else. She stayed at the back of the room, her hood pulled low, her hands busy with data pads and notes. She never spoke unless spoken to. To her, the humans were like fire, bright, too dangerous to touch. She believed none of them would ever notice her. Why would they? She was a shadow, a mistake, a scar in the corner of the room. And so Zariah continued to live as she always had, unseen, unheard, and unwanted. But deep inside, a small flame still survived. It was the part of her that wished, foolishly, that maybe one day someone might look at her without turning away. That maybe one day someone might say a word she had never heard in her life. Beautiful. She did not know that day was closer than she thought. The first time Zariah saw a human up close, she did not understand what she was looking at. He walked into the chamber with other officials, his steps steady but relaxed, as if the heavy walls of the Valari Council did not intimidate him at all. His frame was tall but not armored. His skin was bare, soft, without scales or protective ridges. His face had no mandibles, no sharp edges, only smooth features and a mouth that curved in strange expressions. His hair was dark and cut short, his eyes brown, warm like the soil after rain. This was Commander Elias Rourke of the Terran Alliance. The Valari Council members stared at him with curiosity, some with silent disdain. To them, the humans were odd creatures, weak in body, too soft for war. Yet humans traveled among the stars with boldness. They bargained, they argued. They laughed easily, even in halls where Valari voices usually dripped with formality. Zariah stayed in the far corner of the chamber, half hidden behind a console. Her job was simple: assist the translators, record the words, and never draw attention. Her cloak was pulled low, shadow covering most of her face. She thought herself invisible. But she found her eyes drawn toward the human again and again. He did not move like the Valari. The Valari were rigid, their pride making every step sharp and precise. But Elias carried himself differently. Firm, yes, but not stiff. There was an ease in his movements, as if he trusted the ground to hold him no matter where he stepped. He smiled often, his lips curving upward, his eyes softening in a way that looked strange, but not unpleasant. When he laughed during a lighter moment in the discussion, the sound startled Zariah. It was bright, almost careless, echoing in a hall where laughter was rare. For a moment she wanted to laugh too, though she did not understand why, but then the whispers began. "Look, the flawed one is here again. Why bring her into the chamber?" She should not be seen by outsiders. Zariah's claws tightened around the datapad she carried. She kept her hood low, her heart heavy with the familiar sting of shame. She hoped the human would not notice. She hoped he would look past her like everyone else did. For most of the session, he did. His attention stayed on the Valari Council and the trade arguments. But then, near the end, when she was asked to deliver a data crystal to the head translator, it happened. Her hands shook. The crystal slipped. She bent quickly to catch it, but her hood fell forward, exposing her face. The scarred patch of dull scales glistened under the bright chamber lights. Her curved mandible caught the air, her pale gray eyes lifted by instinct, only to meet his. Zariah froze. This was the moment she feared most. She braced for the flinch, for the look of pity, for the disgust that always came when someone saw her uncovered face. She wanted to disappear into the floor, to vanish into shadow again. But Elias did not look away. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, as though studying her not with disgust, but with curiosity. His eyes softened. His lips curved into the faintest smile, warm, calm, without mockery. Zariah felt her heart stumble. Her breath caught in her chest. She hurried to pull her hood back up, forcing her gaze down, her claws trembling so badly she almost dropped the crystal again. The council dismissed soon after. Voices echoed, chairs scraped, footsteps faded. Zariah stayed behind, too shaken to move quickly. She gathered her notes slowly, trying to steady her breathing. And then a shadow fell across the desk. She looked up. The human stood there, holding out the data crystal she had left behind. "You dropped this earlier," he said, his voice steady, deep and strangely gentle. For a moment, Zariah could not speak. She took the crystal with trembling claws, her hood hiding her face once more. "Thank you," she whispered. Then, almost without thinking, the truth slipped out. "You should not look at me." His brow furrowed slightly. "Why?" She hesitated, shame burning in her chest. At last, she said the words she had always believed. Because I am not pleasant to look at. My people say I am broken. The human was silent for a moment. His brown eyes searched her shadowed face. Then, quietly but firmly, he answered, Then your people are wrong. You're beautiful. The word struck her like lightning. Beautiful. It was a word she had never heard in her life, not once, not even from her family. It was a word that did not belong to her world, a word that felt too bright, too heavy to hold. Her claws tightened around the crystal. She wanted to ask him why, but the words would not come. Her chest ached. Her throat closed. Before she could speak, footsteps echoed again in the hall, and Elias stepped back, giving her space. He only nodded politely and walked away, leaving her trembling in the silence. And for the first time in her life, Zariah was not sure what hurt more. The years of cruel whispers that told her she was ugly, or the single human word that told her she was not. That night, Zariah could not sleep. She sat in her small quarters, staring at the ceiling while the pale moonlight spilled through the window. The chamber was silent, yet her mind would not rest. One word kept echoing again and again, louder than all the whispers she had endured in her life. Beautiful. The human had said it so casually, so firmly, as though it were the most natural truth in the universe. But to her it felt impossible. How could anyone, let alone an outsider, look at her face and call it that? Her claws trembled as she touched the scarred scales of her cheek. They felt as rough and uneven as they always had. Her bent mandible, still curved awkwardly, catching the edge of her hood when she tried to pull it close. Her pale gray eyes still reflected a dull, lifeless shimmer in the mirror. Nothing about her had changed. Nothing could change, and yet something inside her had shifted. She remembered the way Elias had looked at her, not with disgust, not with pity, but with a calmness that unsettled her. His eyes had not darted away. His mouth had curved into that strange human smile, as though he had truly meant what he said. But why? Was it mockery? A trick? She had heard humans were clever with words, that they often used charm in their dealings. Perhaps he had spoken only to comfort her, or to confuse her, or to test her reaction. Her chest ached at the thought. Still, when she closed her eyes, she could see his expression as clearly as the stars outside. There had been no laughter behind his eyes, no cruelty, only sincerity. And that was what shook her most of all. The next morning, Zariah entered the council chamber with her hood pulled low, as always. She tried to bury the memory of his words, but they followed her like a shadow. Every whisper from her people seemed louder now, heavier, as if they wanted to drown out what Elias had said. She should not be here. Hide her face. She is unfit. Each word stabbed her, but instead of fading as they usually did, they collided with the human's voice inside her head. You're beautiful. The contrast was unbearable. When the meeting ended, Zariah lingered, behind to gather the scattered data pads. Her hands shook so badly she almost dropped them. She wanted silence to run back to her quarters, to escape the storm inside her. But before she could leave, she heard footsteps. She froze. The sound was steady, confident, unhurried. She knew without turning who it was. Elias Rourke. He stopped a short distance from her desk. You dropped this again, he said gently, holding out one of the data crystals she had missed. Her hood shadowed her face, but her chest felt tight. She took the crystal with trembling claws, clutching it against her chest. Thank you, she whispered, her voice barely audible. You seem troubled, Elias said. His tone was not demanding, not sharp like the Valari, but calm, inviting. She swallowed hard. Her instincts told her to remain silent, to vanish before she made a mistake. but her heart ached with words she had never spoken aloud. And before she could stop herself, she asked, "Why did you say that yesterday?" Elias tilted his head. "Say what?" Her claws tightened. She whispered, almost ashamed of the word itself, "That I am beautiful." For a moment, there was only silence between them. Zariah's heart pounded painfully. She braced herself for laughter, for mockery, for him to admit it had been a careless joke. But Elias only looked at her with those calm brown eyes, steady and unflinching. "Because it's true," he said, simply. Her breath caught. The chamber felt too small, the air too heavy. She shook her head quickly. "No. No, you do not understand. My people see me as flawed. My face, my scales, my eyes. Everything about me is wrong. I am not pleasant to look at. I am not like the others." Elias stepped a little closer, but his voice stayed quiet. "Maybe your people don't see what I see, but that doesn't make it less true." Zariah's mandibles trembled. She wanted to argue, to deny him, to push his words away before they tore her apart. Yet a part of her, a fragile, desperate part, wanted to believe. She lowered her gaze, her hood falling further forward. "You should not speak this way. It is cruel to give hope where there is none." Elias shook his head. "It isn't cruel to tell the truth." Her throat tightened. No one had ever spoken to her like this before. No one had ever challenged the voices that told her she was unworthy. For the first time, she did not know whether to run from the human's words or to cling to them with all her strength. When Elias finally turned to leave, Zariah was left standing alone, the data crystal clutched tightly in her claws, her heart caught between years of scorn and the single word that had changed everything. Beautiful. The following days were heavier for Zariah than any she had known before. She had always believed her place was in the shadows, silent and unseen. That belief had protected her, like armor made of shame. But now that single human word had cracked, her armor apart. Beautiful. It lingered in her mind, fighting against years of cruel whispers. Every insult she had heard since childhood rose again to challenge it. Broken. Flawed. Unfit. Each cruel memory clashed with the human's voice, steady and warm. The noise inside her head grew unbearable. On the morning of the next council gathering, Zariah stood before her mirror. She hesitated before pulling up her hood. For a moment, her claws trembled at her side. She stared at her reflection. The dull scales, the bent mandible, the gray eyes that never shone like her kin's. Nothing had changed. She was still the same. And yet, her hand would not move to cover her face. It was as though some hidden part of her wanted to believe Elias's words. But when she imagined the eyes of her people, the sneers, the whispers, her courage failed. With a heavy heart, she pulled the hood over her head and left her quarters. The council chamber was crowded that day. Representatives from different clans filled the seats, their voices sharp with debate. Zariah slipped inside quietly, keeping to the edges as she always did. Her datapad felt heavy in her claws. She moved like a shadow, unnoticed, until the whispers began again. There she is, the flawed one. Why let her remain in the chamber? Zariah kept her eyes low, but each word stabbed at her. Her claws dug into the datapad as she tried to steady her breathing. She wanted to run, to disappear, but her duties chained her to the room. When the session ended, she gathered the scattered notes and tablets. But her movements were clumsy, her chest tight with shame. One official sneered as he passed her. "Do not drop them again, Ash Eyes. You embarrass us." The insult burned. She turned away, her hood hiding the tears threatening her eyes. She thought she was alone when she hurried down the quiet hallway, but the sound of footsteps followed her, steady, familiar, Elias. She stopped, pressing herself against the wall, trying to calm the storm inside her. She did not want him to see her shaking. She did not want him to see her broken again. But it was too late. He was already there, his figure blocking the glow of the corridor lights. "You left quickly," he said, his voice calm. Zariah swallowed hard. I did not want to be seen." "By them?" Elias asked. Her mandibles trembled. "By anyone. You don't understand. They are right. I should not be here." Elias was quiet for a long moment. He studied her hooded figure, his eyes steady. Then he said, "No, they are wrong." Zariah shook her head, her voice breaking. "You don't hear the way they speak. You don't see the way they look at me. Even children hide their faces from me. Even my own mother," her voice faltered. "Even she could not bear to look at me. How can one human word erase all of that?" Her chest heaved with the weight of years she had never spoken aloud. For so long, she had hidden the pain, buried it deep. Now it spilled out like a river breaking its banks. Elias stepped closer, but not too close. His voice lowered, firm yet gentle. "Maybe it can't erase it. Maybe nothing can. But it doesn't mean they're right. Beauty isn't what they say it is. It isn't about being perfect. It's about what someone sees when they look at you. And when I look at you, I see strength. I see someone who survived years of cruelty and still stands here. That is beautiful to me." Zariah's claws trembled at her sides. Her hood still covered her face, but her eyes stung with tears. No one had ever spoken to her like this. No one had ever given her words that felt like light instead of knives. And yet, doubt clawed at her. Could she truly believe him? Or was she too broken to ever accept such words? The storm raged inside her as she turned away, unable to face him any longer. But his words followed her into the silence of her chambers, battling with the old whispers that haunted her. For the first time in her life, the voices of her people did not feel completely unshakable. For the first time, doubt did not only belong to her shame, it also belonged to her hope. Zariah stood alone by the great glass wall of the council building. Outside, the stars stretched across the void like rivers of silver fire. 2 moons hung over the capital city, their pale glow spilling across the towers. Normally, she found comfort in the stars, but tonight they only reminded her of her smallness, her unworthiness. Her hood was pulled low, her claws pressed against the glass as if she could fall into the stars themselves and vanish. The whispers of her people clung to her mind. Ugly, broken, flawed. Even after all these years, they still pierced her like knives. She did not hear Elias approach at first. His steps were steady, unhurried, not like the sharp, heavy strides of the Valari. Only when his reflection appeared faintly in the glass beside her did she realize he had come. "You ran out of the chamber quickly," Elias said softly. Zariah's throat tightened. "I could not stay. Their words. They are true." He stood a little behind her, not forcing his presence, but his voice was firm. "No, they are not true." She shook her head. "You do not understand. Since I was born, I have been told I am less than others. My scales are uneven. My mandible is bent. My eyes are the wrong color. They tell me even the stars look away from me. My own mother—" Her voice broke, trembling with pain she had never spoken aloud. "My own mother could not meet my gaze. If even she could not, how could you?" Elias was silent for a moment. His reflection in the glass shifted as he stepped closer, though still giving her space. When he spoke, his words carried weight, steady and deliberate. "Because I don't see what they see." Zariah turned slightly, her hood hiding her face. "Then what do you see?" He met her gaze through the shadow of her hood. His eyes were warm, calm, unflinching. I see strength. I see someone who grew up surrounded by cruelty but still stands tall. I see someone who has carried pain her whole life and yet still walks forward instead of giving up. Her claws trembled at her sides. Strength is not beauty. Where I come from, Elias said firmly, it is. The words hit her harder than she expected. She stared at him, struggling to breathe. For the Valari, beauty was perfection of form, smooth scales, sharp symmetry, glowing eyes. It was something she could never be. But Elias spoke as though beauty was something deeper, something that could exist even in the cracks and scars. I don't understand, she whispered. How can you look at me and say that word? Beautiful. Elias stepped closer, his voice steady. Because when I looked at you, I didn't see brokenness. I saw a fire that survived storms. Your people might call you flawed, but to me, you're proof that cruelty cannot destroy everything. That is beautiful. And if your people cannot see it, then the failure is theirs, not yours. Her chest ached, her mandibles trembling as she lowered her gaze. You speak as if words can change what I am. Not what you are, he said quietly. What you believe about yourself. Zariah's breath caught. She had never thought of it that way. Her entire life, she had accepted her people's judgment as truth. She had carried it like a chain around her neck, never daring to question it. But Elias's words pushed against that chain, loosening it, cracking it. The silence stretched between them. Outside, the moons drifted higher, their light painting the glass in silver. For the first time, Zariah found herself wanting to believe him, wanting to hold on to his words as if they were a lifeline. But doubt still lingered, sharp and heavy. If you are wrong, she whispered, then I will only fall harder when hope breaks. Elias's eyes softened, but his voice stayed steady. Then let me be wrong with you. Let me carry some of that weight, instead of you carrying it alone. Her claws tightened against the glass. No one had ever offered such a thing before. No one had ever spoken to her not with pity, not with scorn, but with honesty and care. For a long time, she said nothing. Her heart pounded, her mind a storm. But even through the storm, one truth began to take root. Perhaps she had been listening to the wrong voices her whole life. And for the first time, she wondered if one human voice might be enough to change everything. The next council day came sooner than Zariah expected. She woke before the suns rose, her chest already heavy with dread. The council chamber would be full again, the voices sharp, the eyes cruel. She imagined the whispers that would meet her, the sneers, the way her people would twist their faces at the sight of her. For as long as she could remember, she had survived such days by staying small, by hiding beneath her hood. But now, something new stirred inside her, a memory, a voice. I saw strength. That is beautiful to me. The words of Elias echoed in her mind, louder than the insults, brighter than the shadows she had lived in. She sat before her mirror, her hood folded neatly on the table. Her claws hovered above it, uncertain. Her reflection stared back at her. The jagged scales, the bent mandible, the pale gray eyes, all the things her people had used as proof she was broken. She had believed them for so long. But for the first time, she wondered if maybe, just maybe, she had been wrong to believe. Her claws trembled. Fear gripped her chest, but she lowered her hand. She left the hood behind. When Zariah entered the council chamber, silence fell. Heads turned. Mandibles clicked in surprise. Whispers spread like fire. She walked slowly, her face uncovered, her pale eyes lifted. Her heart pounded so hard she thought it would break. Every step felt heavier than the last, but she did not stop. There. She is! Someone hissed. She dares show her face! Hide her away! The voices cut her like knives. Her claws shook at her sides. For a moment, doubt surged, and she almost turned to run, almost reached for the hood she had left behind. But then she saw him. Elias stood at the far side of the chamber watching her, and he smiled. Not a mocking smile, not pity, but the same calm, steady smile he had given her before. He did not look away. He did not flinch. His eyes held hers as if to say, "I see you, and I am not afraid." Something inside her steadied. Zariah lifted her chin and walked to her station. She placed her datapad on the desk with trembling claws, but she did not hide. For the first time in her life, she let them all see her. The council session began, their arguments filling the air, but Zariah barely heard them. Her mind was a storm of fear and hope, shame and courage. The stares burned against her skin, yet, every time she faltered, she found Elias's gaze across the room, holding her steady. Not once did he look away. When the meeting ended, the officials swept out quickly, their whispers buzzing like insects. Some sneered, some shook their heads, some muttered curses, but none of them could erase what had happened. Zariah had stood before them uncovered, and she had endured. As the chamber emptied, she remained at her desk, her claws still trembling. She had not spoken. She had not fought. And yet, for her, it felt like the greatest battle she had ever won. The sound of footsteps broke her thoughts. She looked up. Elias approached, his expression calm, but his eyes bright with quiet pride. "You did it," he said simply. Zariah lowered her gaze, her mandibles trembling. "I was afraid." "Of course you were," Elias replied. "But you stood anyway. That is courage." Her chest ached with a strange warmth, one she could not name. For so long she had believed herself weak, broken, unworthy. And yet here, she was standing in the open light of the chamber, her face uncovered and still breathing. For the first time, she thought maybe she was not as fragile as she believed. That night, under the twin moons, she walked alone through the city streets. The stares still followed her, but she did not pull her cloak over her face. The air was cold, but she lifted her chin, letting the moonlight touch her scars. And when she reached the quiet steps of the council building, she looked up at the endless stars. She whispered a word she had never dared to claim before, a word she had once thought belonged to everyone but her. Beautiful. The word trembled on her lips, but it did not break. It was small, fragile, but real. And for the first time, she almost believed it.